one day I walked into a bookstore on Bedford Avenue, and I saw all these beautiful logos of all these bands on there. And I thought, well, what's this? I opened it up, and there was double truck spreads with 5 people per spread, all shot on white background like Richard Avedon, and they were fans of bands. So Willie Nelson fans had braids, ZZ Top fans had beards, the Wailers fans had dreadlocks, Jimmy Buffett fans wore parrot heads and grass skirts, Marilyn Manson fans looked like Marilyn Manson. I thought, this is so cool. How can I create a guessing game with the musicians? Mm-hmm. Oh, I have all these photographs of them with their instruments on their heads. And that's when it began. In 2008, I started, obsessing about this concept.
There has got to be more than this.
Michael Weintrob. Man, this has been a long time coming. It's great to see you.
Man, it's good to see you too, Corey.
You're so chill.
I'm going to turn my phone off right now.
I remember the first time I met you. Let's take a journey back in time to our friend John Scarpati's house this is probably 2012.
I think it was 2014.
I was pretty close.
2014.
And you were still living in New York at the time. And you were visiting town, and you guys knew each other. And I was immediately struck. I was like, this guy is a consummate hustler. Like, it is on all the time.
And
I could relate.
Right.
I could relate, yeah. And I could and can. And you've only grown, maybe a better word is exploded since then with many of your projects, your studio here on the East Side. And I just wanted to talk to you about Instrumenthead, which it's fair to say I think you're most well known for. What started that project, and just kind of how your mentality about how you go about promoting your work, getting the word out there, and what drives you. Is one of the things about this podcast I think is I try to make it helpful to people. As there's a lot of creative people who don't quite know how to put it into gear on the ground and make it go.
Right.
And you have that aptitude, my friend, and I'm here to make you divulge your secrets.
Thank you. I'll take it as a compliment.
Yeah, man. So where did this start, the Instrumenthead project?
Well, I'm 48 now, and I've been photographing musicians since I was 19. When I went to school at CSU in Colorado in Fort Collins, and I became the house photographer for the Aggie Theater, which is a small rock club there. And I would always go backstage and take portraits of the band, along with shooting live photographs. And on this particular night, I took a photograph of the Derek Trucks band backstage, and their bassist, Todd Smalley, came running down the stairs a little bit late with his bass. And I said, do something crazy, man. I don't know, put your bass down your shirt. And he did. And that was the first time I ever did it. And it wasn't like a light bulb went off on my head and said, wow, this is going to be my art project. I didn't even know art projects really existed at that time. So this became part of my process when I would do portrait shoots with bands. I would say, cover your face with your instrument. And they would say, why? I was like, just do it. It's fun. And, it was just something I always did. And then in 2003, I moved to New York City, Brooklyn really, but I met with editors at Vibe and Spin and Rolling Stone, and they all said the same thing, that my live music photography was as good as it gets, but if I want to be a portrait photographer, I need to do some studying. And I ended up moving into a building in Williamsburg that was filled with photographers and filmmakers and assistants for major photographers. Like my neighbors were first assistants for Mark Seliger and Stephen Klein and Annie Leibovitz and people like that. And these guys became my peers, and they taught me about studio lighting and how to be a portrait photographer. And I remember I was looking for my next thing to be working on. I would go on, the jam cruise, and I would dress the musicians as crew members to tell the story of the cruise, where I shoot Warren Haynes as the captain, or Sharon Jones as the receptionist, or Grace Potter as the maid. And, I was always trying to push myself to do something creative. And I remember one day I walked into a bookstore on Bedford Avenue, and I saw all these beautiful logos of all these bands on there. And I thought, well, what's this? I opened it up, And there was double truck spreads with 5 people per spread, all shot on white background like Richard Avedon, and they were fans of bands. So Willie Nelson fans had braids, ZZ Top fans had beards, the Wailers fans had dreadlocks, Jimmy Buffett fans wore parrot heads and grass skirts, Marilyn Manson fans looked like Marilyn Manson. I thought, this is so cool. How can I create a guessing game with the musicians? Mm-hmm. Oh, I have all these photographs of them with their instruments on their heads. And that's when it began. In 2008, I started, obsessing about this concept and how to bring it to life.
The point from accidental stumbling onto this idea to making that connection was the years between
8 years.
Yeah.
Really, about 8.5, 9 years, yeah.
And you'd already been doing it. You're like, oh, wow, I'd been doing this.
I was doing it. I had done 3 studio portraits in that style that had been used on records. One was George Porter Jr. from the Meters. One was Carl Denson, who's now the sax player in the Rolling Stones, and a woman named Viva DiConcini.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can pull one of these up, Kyle, and for the folks just listening, describe the concept. Mike, you were kind enough to send some of these in advance. And what are we looking at right now? Let's
right now, you were looking at a portrait of a guy named Alam Khan. Now, Alam Khan is the son of Ali Akbar Khan, who is the most famous sarod player in modern times from India. And they have a school called the Ali Akbar College of Music in San Rafael. So I went there and I shot portraits of Alam and Zakir Hussain. And in this portrait is a picture of Alam sitting there with his sarod hanging. And in his lap is a sculpture of his father's face surrounded by flowers. Mm-hmm. So he actually became a totem to his father.
Wow, beautiful. And it's compelling, and just maybe you can pull the curtain back behind the artifice a little bit and explain that's a big instrument.
It's a big instrument.
So that's not something that he's like balancing on his shoulders.
No, it's hanging. It's on wires. So everything you see here is actually done in camera. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to do it in the computer. If someone asked me to do it in the computer, I wouldn't know how to do it. Mm-hmm. I have a certain skill set, and that's not one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm reminded of the great director Michel Gondry. Do you know his
I know
work?
Who that is. Yeah.
So much of his, he's gone on to be a well-known and revered director, probably most famously for not The Unbearable Lightness of Being. This movie with Jim Carrey. Kyle?
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Thank you. Yeah, he directed Eternal Sunshine, but he had a background in music video making, and there's a great documentary. I don't know if you can still get it, but it's him kind of talking about like the Bjork videos he made, and it's so creative. The Green Day, he made the Green Day video for "Do You Have the Time to Live?" Their hugest first hit, and it was all in camera. It was all out on set. It was all handmade props and nothing in post. And I think there's something so charming about that. Maybe this is just a riff for a second, but like as culture is gravitating toward AI, and I've been not enamored with superhero movies for 20 years, and partly because it's not as fun when it's in a computer. To me, it's a little alien, and there's something so magical about like solving a process in a room.
Building a set and creating the scene and telling the story. I
was speaking of San Rafael, which is in California, north of San Francisco. Not too long ago, I got to go to Industrial Lights and Magic, which is the sound stage for Lucasfilms before he moved out to the ranch. Yeah, and the room where they exploded the first Death Star is still there, and they have like the little chinks in the concrete from where the bits that they exploded in the room like broke the concrete, and they were like circled as like kind of an eternal moment. It was so cool. Imagine the moment of being there and like pulling that off and then seeing it on the screen and being like, yeah, that's actually an explosion.
You probably had to wear a hard hat.
Oh, probably some ears were deafened.
Right.
So that's awesome. So you've relegated your trade to the actual world of living light, and seen no need to break into Photoshop and get jiggy with it.
Yeah, when I need guys like that, I get guys who are really good at it
Sure.
to help me do it. Like when you're preparing the photos for press, you have to prepare them in a certain way. So,
So you started down this journey with Instrumenthead, and did at that time when you thought, okay, this is maybe going to be a thing. I mean, so from that moment to the release of your first book, that was another 10 years, I want to guess.
that didn't come out until 2017. For a long time, I didn't show them to anybody except for artists and managers in the business because I was always afraid of someone stealing my idea, like a lot of artists are, and afraid to put their work out there. And I remember I had my first kind of exhibit at a place called Bimbe in Brooklyn, and about a month later, someone called me and said, "Hey, great photo in Mojo magazine," and it was of a portrait of an artist that I'm not going to say his name, and it looked like one of my photographs, and it was lit like one of my photographs on the same type of background, but I wasn't the one who shot it. So I got upset, and I started calling my lawyer and said, we got to do this and that. And then I realized I need to have an exhibition. I need to do it in a big way. And I'd been going to Jazzfest in New Orleans for many, many years, and I thought that would be the place to do it because I worked with a lot of New Orleans musicians, and that was my goal, is to have this big exhibition. And that was kind of the start of my new life when I pulled that off.
You pulled the trigger on that. You went down and you did. Was it a big exhibition?
Well,
your first time?
basically, I photograph concerts for my day job, and I'm the house photographer for the Bluegrass Underground at the Caverns, which is now called Cavern Sessions Live. And I remember that's always the March 23rd weekend. Well, Jazzfest is the last weekend of April, first weekend in May. So I flew to New Orleans. Well, first off, I put a post on Facebook saying, do I know anyone who has a venue in New Orleans? I'm looking for a place to do this thing. Someone contacted me, said, yeah, call this guy. His name was Gregor Fox. And Gregor Fox had a warehouse across from DBA on Frenchman Street. It was a 50,000 square foot warehouse. But in front of the warehouse was a 100-person art market where people have tents and they sell their wares. And so we walked into this, it's on the weekends, we walked into this warehouse, and he said, well, all the photographers in New Orleans are doing a certain thing. I want to see something different. I said, have you ever seen my work? And he said, no. And I showed him. And then he goes, I'm going to give you this warehouse for the whole 2 weeks of Jazzfest. Now I'm standing in this giant warehouse. I have no idea how I'm going to print the photos, how I'm going to frame the photos, how I'm going to display the photos, and how I'm going to get the money to pay for all of this. But I had 5 weeks to pull it off. And I remember a year prior, I'd been asked to be a host at a party called Rock Your Palette in Chicago, where it was a MasterCard priceless event where they fused music, art, and food. And now when I was shooting these portraits, I traveled around the country going to different music venues and using this as my studio because there were big open rooms that were empty during the day. I went to Chicago and shot a bunch of portraits of Chicago artists. So I pitched them. I said, hey, we'll put the normal portraits on one wall. We'll put the instrument heads on the other. And then we can get the musicians and the photographs to perform. And they had these 5-star Michelin chefs cooking food. So I remember there was a company called Jack Prince. A friend of mine named Damian Guess ran or he wasn't a friend then. He had run the company, and he traded us these giant prints in exchange for a media buy on Thrillist.com. So I called the producer of the event. I said, who was that guy who printed the photos? And I called him and I said, do you remember me? He goes, I not only remember you, I created a product line based off of what we did for you because the prints came out so nice. I told him about the space. I said, do you want to get involved? And he jumped off the cliff with me and decided to sponsor the event.
Fantastic.
And, 75 4-foot tall photographs in a warehouse that almost got destroyed twice in 24 hours. And
From
we made it through.
storms?
Well, so basically I went to Alabama, where I'm from, and my friend taught me how to frame these photographs. We framed them in his living room. I wrapped each piece in
you didn't even know how to frame.
I don't know how to do any of this. So we basically wrapped each frame in bubble wrap, put them in a U-Haul. So imagine a U-Haul truck driving around New Orleans with 75 pieces of glass wrapped in bubble wrap with all the potholes that are in New Orleans. It was, first of all, that was insane in itself. Then we are in this warehouse. It's Tuesday night. The show opens Thursday. We're putting the hardware on the back of the frames. And I had a friend of mine who was a contractor build these 8x8 drywall cubes and some other walls that were waiting for us when we arrived so that we could, install this artwork. I remember we were installing the hardware. We got to the last frame. We were leaning them against this drywall wall that he had built between two columns, and we were so happy. And the last frame went down. All of a sudden, the wall starts falling, and I'm screaming, and I'm holding the wall, and my friends are taking them, and they put them up against the brick wall because obviously nothing's going to happen against the brick wall. Well, this was about 4 a.m. At 6:30, our phone started blowing up, saying like a tropical storm was coming through, and the warehouse is flooding. And we had to run back, and we put all the frames on the table, and we ended up losing 2 photos out of 75, and about 7,000 people showed up there over the 2 weeks, and that was the start of my new life.
What a moment.
When I realized I can sell my work to the fans of music and not the business of music.
Yes. There's so many things I like about this story. And
it's crazy, man. I can't even believe
but
this happened.
That is you. You decided that you had to, now was the time to pull the trigger. You thought like somebody was encroaching on your territory. And you're like, I got to do something about this.
Right.
And you took a few steps, and like all of a sudden, okay, we got a venue. And now what? And you'd like been building up relationships for years,
right? And
you were really setting the table for yourself for that moment without really knowing it, by delivering consummate work for people all along the way, so that when it was your moment in need, people were more than happy to meet you right there.
That's it. It's all about relationships.
It's totally fantastic. And then just like the willingness to just make it happen. Like that's the thing about you that I've known since forever, is that you're like, okay, the answer is yes, this is going to work. I don't know how, but we will do it.
It's manifestation, man. Like, be careful what you think about, because it might come true.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a prime example of that with your whole Morse code and, the movie and this podcast and your music career. And, you're a complete manifester and a connector of people as well,
It's one thing, I feel like this is a late realization in my life. Probably learned the hard way, but I've said recently to a few folks that it's wise to be careful what you get good at, because whatever you get good at, you have to keep doing that. Like if you have some success in a thing, that's going to be how you spend the majority of your time. And so don't get good at something that you don't really like.
That's it.
Unless you're willing to make that compromise. And, I think that this Morse code thing where we're at right now, I didn't know that we would be sitting here, even a year ago, but it was just like one thing. I took one, a step forward in a direction that seemed worthwhile, in short. And it was a positive experience, and then things change. The world's constantly changing. Opportunities are always changing. And a door opens that wasn't open before. Maybe that was when I met my friend and now collaborator, Travis Nicholson, and who ended up co-writing the script that became this TV pilot. I met him at Brown's Diner, and I just had like it's happened maybe 3 times in my life where I've met somebody and I'm just like, my life just changed. Like you and me are going to work together, and I don't know where it's going to go, but it's such a strong feeling. And I had that. And then we had this whole journey with this TV pilot. It won all these awards last year, and we're working hard to sell it. I have every belief that that's going to happen. I have no idea how it's going to happen. But along the way, I'm like, well, what can I do to leverage what I've got to make that as likely as possible? I feel like I'm speaking your language,
Yeah, we're the same.
Yeah, and part of that was for me is like, well, what if we took the theme for the show that's all about like a guy trying to live a sustainable, creative life, who's not, young and a celebrity, and but he's passionate about art, and he's got this family, and he's just trying to make it all happen. I'm like, I live in that community. There's like countless examples of that happening in real life. And so it was just like the littlest step to take this like fictitious world and move the theme into the real world, and then have these people tell their version of that story. And it's all under this kind of same rubric of Morse code. And it's like, now I'm so enjoying these conversations. I get so much out of it, and it's got a whole new life of its own. I got a new creative partner in Kyle over here, and we're like, could not do this without him. And it's like we have a weekly adventure, and every week it's super different. It's a lot of, it's a lot of work to keep it all going. But it's like, if this ended up being my life 5 years from now, no problem.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's great.
So I feel like you had that example. I mean, you had this like with Instrumenthead, you started out, and this has gone from one show at Jazzfest 15 years ago to it's traveled around the world.
Right.
You're like, now I feel like a Jazz mainstay.
Yeah.
Two hard, huge, beautiful coffee table books of your work. And I just want to talk about this too, because another thing about you is like you're like kind of a wide open spirit, the way artists have to be. You kind of have to be receptive. You have to be like, you can't control everything and engineer it and make it all so. And to me, the example of that is that first experience at the Aggie with the Derek Trucks guy, and you're like that spontaneous, or like, hey man, just do this. And he's like, what? And you didn't even know where that was going to go, and you didn't even know for years. But so there's this piece of like openness to spontaneity, but then there's this other piece that you've got, which is like kind of seeing where it could all go. And then you started setting the table in advance. And I want to talk about that.
It's calculated.
Yeah, there's some calculation. So this is kind of genius, right? So the one example of that are these two books. We have them right here. I'm going to hold this, since they're so cool. I'm going to hold one up. Can you see that, Kyle? Yeah. This is Instrumenthead.
So that's the Instrumenthead book. And after I'd done the exhibits, I thought, well, the next thing I have to do is the book, right? So I started meeting with publishers in New York, like Rizzoli and HarperCollins. And, they would say things to me like, who are the famous people? How are we going to sell it? If you buy 5,000 buybacks, we'll publish your book. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to sell 5,000 copies of the book. They say that you have to have the book to do the exhibit. But I did the complete opposite. I created this exhibit, built a fan base. So in 2015, I decided to launch a crowdfund, which I did on Indiegogo, and I raised the money to make this new book, the first book called Instrumenthead. And going back to this building I lived in New York, there was a guy named David Allen Harvey who lived there, who's a famous Magnum photographer, and the guy who was the editor for Burn Magazine, which is the biggest photojournalist reportage blog in the world, lives in Italy, and he has a relationship with these printers in Italy. And so these guys produced this book for me. I got to go to Italy, and drink the wine and drink the coffee, and the place where the book was made is where they invented tiramisu. It was amazing. And so I made this like beautiful book. I couldn't believe it. And then, I entered the IPPY Awards, which is the Independent Publishers Awards, and I won Most Outstanding Design, which was incredible. And
this is what year?
This is in 2017. It took me 2 years to do the book because I had the wrong people working with me first. Had to raise more money to get the right people, because I spent a lot of money on the wrong things. Because like you said, I'm jumping off the cliff and, not really knowing what I'm doing. And, I figure it out as I go along. So then I made the book, and it was amazing. It was a great journey. And then the one thing that people always said is, I wish I could see their face, right? I wish you could show their face. And to do another book of this work, another book from these photos, just seemed like such an overwhelming, daunting task to me. But, I had about 800 books in my basement, and I thought, well, how am I going to sell these books? I got to make the new book. So I had this whole plan to go back to New Orleans and have an 11-day event. And I booked 35 bands, and that was going to be the launch of the crowdfund. And then all the sponsors I pulled out, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and the pandemic happened. So the pandemic kind of saved me from having to cancel this event. And,
because it got
canceled because I couldn't get the money. And So now we're back at the drawing board. We're here in Nashville. We're hanging out, and I thought, what can we do? What can we do? So we turned my studio into a virtual venue. We met a guy named Max Schindler, who was a director for Good Morning America and the Today Show and Dateline, and a guy named Greg Burns, who you know, who's an audio engineer in town. And we turned my place into a TV studio, and we filmed over 70 concerts during the pandemic. And we gave all these musicians a place to create. It was kind of like the shrimp boat in Forrest Gump. Like, no one had a place to play. I had agents from CAA calling me being like, I want to book my bluegrass band in your photo studio. I'm like, what is going on? And you actually played a show. We did one for you.
Yeah.
Which you guys will see one day. It exists.
It does exist.
With Bill Miller.
Yes.
That was amazing. So I did, all these musicians who I've worked with over the years came through and played these concerts gratis for me to raise money for this new book. And again, I raised the money for the new book where we unmasked the musicians. So so I was actually ahead of my time when thinking about doing this book. And then when the pandemic happened and the symbolism of the removal of the mask, which was the instrument, kind of tied it all together.
Yeah.
And so I'm super proud. And then I won the bronze medal in photography at the same awards for the next book.
And so, talk about that. It's remarkable, the layout from book to book. It's the same. Isn't it the same order?
It's the same order. So you have the surreal and the real. So as you flip through the pages, you know, in the Instrumenthead book, you know, photography is about telling stories. So in the entertainment business, I'm always bringing, you know, they historically will bring in photographers and stylists and makeup artists and create an illusion for this product that the business is trying to sell. For me, photography is about telling stories. So I tell the musicians, what is about you that makes you special? How are people going to know it's you? So people show up with their stuff and their clothes and their props. And then the Instrumenthead got them in the door. And then I was able to take an honest portrait of them. So one vessel led to the other.
And so, I mean, that's part of why the pictures are so powerful, is that you were really the conduit for the artist to tell his or her own story. You know, like you said, you were like, how do you want to present yourself? They came in with obviously their instrument, but there are also maybe some props or clothes that they wanted to wear. And so you were capturing that artist
in their space that they were at that time.
Yes.
And then that's what tells a story. You know, like there's a portrait of Sugar Blue there. He's known for wearing this bandolero for his harmonicas. He did the harmonica solo on Miss You, Rolling Stones, and actually dyed a bunch of sugar cubes blue. So it's kind of campy and a little whimsical and kitschy, but, you know, it actually makes sense to me because it just tells a story, you know?
And it captures like a living scene at this moment in time. I mean, this is like a piece of history.
Thanks for saying
not,
that.
Not many of us can claim to even have had the opportunity to make something that has a shot at living, you know, and being important 500 years from now. And I think this book, this collection of book, and these books and this material absolutely will be
wow. Thanks for saying
looked
that.
at and revered. No, man, you did it.
You know, I was living in New York. And I was shooting portraits I was doing photography, and I was the king of losing jobs in New York City, you know, because I thought I needed to get paid $5,000 every time I clicked a button because I didn't want to screw up the photo industry, because if I'm operating on a certain level, like I need to get paid a certain level, or the whole photography industry was going to, you know, I was going to blow it up in my mind. And
by undercutting your
right, by
competition.
undercutting my competition. Yeah. So I realized, you know, there was a woman who lived below me named Connie Crothers, who was Lenny Tristano's prodigy and Max Roach's pianist and lover. And she was down there like playing bop, like she was in her 60s, just killing it. And I remember she came up to me and goes, I'd like to do a photo shoot. And I gave her a price, and I thought that was the bro deal. And she goes, I can't afford that. And I go, you know what, I'll just do it for you. And then I realized at that moment, like, do I have a photo studio or a really expensive storage closet? I need to create work. So basically all the musicians who came in, I gave them free promo shots in trade. So it became about the art of it and not about the exchange of money for a service. And that's really what, like, because that's how I got to where I was as a photographer. I met all these people because I was running around shooting all these concerts and, being around people. And, if you're waiting for someone to pay you to do your craft, you might be waiting forever. And then when you do finally get your shot, you're going to be real rusty if you don't have a lot of practice.
Yeah. Riddle me this. This is the way that I've thought about what I do. And I was thinking about this today even because I'm kind of in this new phase where I'm writing a lot, and I have a Substack now, and I post a new short story every Sunday, and it's like
So cool.
I wake up on Saturday morning and write 1,500 words, and I have no idea what it's going to be that week, and then Sunday morning I edit it. But the point is that like I think of what I do is like I do it for free. And I don't know if this is a great business model for people, but I've noticed that like that's what I've done my whole career is that like I have this attitude of like I'm so happy to have the opportunity to share this, and I'm gonna do it anyway.
Right.
And then people kind of show up somehow, and I feel like that's exactly what this.
It's
you have your version of
manifestation,
that
man.
story.
It's like be careful what you think about because it might come true, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And just. And it's like when you think about something so hard, like, I don't know, when your Morse code, your TV show was happening, you want it to happen so bad. And then you notice how the moment you let something go that you've been obsessing about and you let it go, that's when it comes to you.
Yes.
And, that's just what's been happening to me my whole career and my whole life. And it's happening to everyone if they just keep their eyes open.
Well, and it's funny because it's like there's a little bit of a what is that, the Zen philosophy cone, because you do have to let it go, but you also have to be there to help it every step of the way and be open to whatever needs to happen to let this vision have a chance to live. It's both of those things are true because I feel like you sort of embody that where
Right. It's like giving to give.
Yes.
But be available to receive if something is coming your way.
Yeah, man. I think that I learned a lesson in 2019 about this very thing where prior to that, I've like always been sort of white knuckling my way through my career. Just like, I'm just going to do it. Nobody's going to work as hard as me.
No one's going to stop me.
No one's going to stop me. That kind of attitude. Exactly. Right. And I see a lot of artists doing that exact thing. And I'm in a much different place right now. And part of that's like I lost my little sister in 2019, and it really did a lot to hit a reset button for me in terms of priorities and perspective. And part of that's like I live 3,000 miles away from my whole family. Everybody's on the West Coast now. My little sister then was in Idaho where I grew up. And I see my folks twice a year. And, I made this decision 20 years ago to move to Nashville to like make this go of it. And suddenly this thing happens. And I'm like, what is important? And like, where am I trying to get? Where am I trying to get here that's got like worth all of this? Cause I'm not 25 anymore. This is my life. And it did prompt like a hard reset. I was out in Montana for the summer and thought maybe I was going to be done with music and done with Nashville and really open to all of that, like really okay with the idea that maybe it was time to do something different, and just praying a lot at the time and stuff. And I mean like Morse code, I'd made this web series for probably 2 years, just done it. It was really fun, but didn't make any sense. But and I like in that summer, that was one of the things I really let go of, and was like, I learned a lot. I'm really proud of it. It exists, and I'm okay with it being done. I really was and am. And when I came back to town, it was just like other people were like, hey man, you got to keep doing like, have you met this guy? Have you met this guy? And I just started like meeting the opportunity where it was at, and it's really with no agenda beyond that. And I'm still riding that energy in a weird way.
You're doing it.
We're here. Like, exactly. And I'm just like, if it all ends tomorrow, it's totally fine. I mean, like my first priority is to my family, to my wife. That's my life. That's what's so exciting. And this is all just like, I'm always going to be making something, and I'm going to be talking to creative people, and whatever that is, if that's a podcast, if that's
And you're an
songwriting,
amazing musician, Corby. And it's not like you have to show that every day to prove to everyone that you are like you're as good as anybody. And to become a famous person, it's all timing. So it's like you never know what's going to happen. And it's like, you know, as long as you do your art and you just do it well, and to the best of your ability, and if people dig it, they dig it, and if they don't, they don't. It's
100%.
it's like sometimes, you know, I'm doing it. I do it for me.
Yeah, man.
You know, I mean, I do these photo shoots. Like I'm here selling these books and doing these art shows and doing all this, but it's like I need to do these portrait shoots just to release, you know, the anxiety that I have built up inside of me. You know, to kind of step into my, you know, the flow of it. You know.
Well, before we get to a couple of pictures, one thing I wanted to see if we could get at, I don't know if you're comfortable talking about it, but like, how do you address the mental challenge of setbacks and the constant vigilance that it takes to be like really forging your own way forward in a career? You know, you're a one of one in this. And when you are a one of one, you don't have some of the support system that folks that work in teams or for a larger effort might have. And so when you do have these setbacks, like when the tropical storm comes in on the eve of the Jazzfest premiere and threatens to destroy everything you worked for, how do you keep your shit together? Because you're a cool cucumber, man. Like,
I mean,
I've never
you know,
seen you explode.
I mean, I explode. You know? I've exploded. You know, I mean, if you had seen me at 4:00 in the morning crying up against the, you know, but I just have faith, man. I believe that what I'm doing is historically important. I mean, it's like the Blues Brothers. I'm not going to say I'm on a mission from God, but I'm on a mission from something.
Yeah.
From somewhere. And I look at this work, I have another 400 people that aren't even in these books. Everything is shot before 2016. I'm still shooting these portraits and shooting concerts, and I'll put out books of that stuff. But this work just flows through me. So I look at this work and sometimes can't even believe that I even did this. Mm-hmm. Like we are vessels for our creative output. Who knows where the inspiration is coming from, So I just have faith, and I try to, just today, my server went down in my studio, and I'm, on the phone with customer support, and, I don't have a physical backup because it's a RAID, and I back up to Amazon Glacier, and I'm thinking, well, hell, if this thing goes down, I'm going to have to pay a fortune to Amazon Glacier to get all my artwork back. Why am I so dumb? Why did I not have this physical backup on? So now the server's up. I'm buying a new computer. I'm buying 2 new servers, and I'm never going to have this problem again. But for me, it's like I got to lose to win kind of thing. And so like this situation that I'm dealing with today, it's like right before I came here, I got my server back online. So I'm in a good state of mind to be able to do this interview with you, man. But it's like, again, it goes back to like the problems of, I have all these books. How am I going to sell them? I can't physically sell these out of the back of my truck forever. I wish I could get a wholesale deal or a distribution deal with a publisher. Well, there's a company called Ingram that's out of Nashville, which is one of the biggest book distributors, wholesalers in the world. I think the biggest. And normally a publisher like myself won't be able to get a deal with someone like that because you have to have 10 titles. But, a guy named Bill called me and said, who wrote the Bobby Keys book, who says, hey, I want to work on a book on Nashville home studios that we might start working on together. Maybe we'll come shoot a portrait of you in this studio. And he goes, well, I got a buddy of mine who works at Ingram. We go to the hockey games together. He's got a lot of great ideas. And he comes over to my studio, and I show him my books, and I say, well, I've never been in a store. I mean, I take that back. I've been in the Fotografiska Museum and PS1 MoMA in New York City. And those are the 2, and Parnassus here in Nashville and Grimey's. But other than that, never had the opportunity. And I thought, well, how can I get my books in these stores? First off, what do you do at Ingram? Oh, I oversee all of their business operations. I go, So what do? He goes, oh, I'll just get you in the system. So now I have the opportunity to potentially start selling my books wholesale to stores. So it's just been the turtle wins the race kind of vibe, you know? And it's just, this is a product that I have that I can sell, that supports my family, supports the community, that educates people. So most of the time, you know, as an artist, you put out a record, you have a cycle, you go to the next thing. For me, it's like, this is just something that I'll always do, and I can always offer this. And for 90% of people who see it, it's fresh.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, just having intention and being mindful. That's the key to all of it. And just having faith that what you're doing is the right thing for you to be doing in that time, you know?
And like the through line through all of that, I feel like for me, this is the case, and I'm guessing it is for you, is to enjoy the day-to-day existence, to actually enjoy, you know, whatever it is that you spend doing that particular day, from when you wake up to when you go to bed. If you're enjoying that, then whatever the circumstances change, the money goes up, the money goes down, the problems are always there.
Right. It's always, you know, I would always go to Jazzfest in New Orleans, and I'd be strapped down with all this camera gear, standing in this field, and I'll be like, well, I'm back, and I'm still broke. The next year I'll be like, I'm back, and I'm still broke. And that happened for about 15 years. And then I'll be like, I'm back. I'm not that broke. Maybe I'll be broke next week, but I'm still here. Yeah. And they're still letting me come, and they're giving me access. And like, you know, it's all about these relationships and doing right by people and being honest with people. When you fuck up, you admit that you fuck up, and you're not a narcissist, and you know, I'm trying my best to do what I say. Sometimes I can't pull it off, but my intention has always been there.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say earlier, which is that no matter what happens, like your level of success, some kind of new level of success just brings with it a whole new host of problems.
Right.
You know, there's really not anywhere to get. It's nice to have the extra money and the little cushion, but with the extra money comes the obligations, comes more people trying to dig into it, comes the necessity of maintaining the machine that keeps it all going. And, you know, there's something really wonderful about being lean and mean and poor and in it on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis.
Being in it. And you had mentioned something a second ago about how do I handle the stress. Well, you know, as an artist, you don't know what the seeds are that you're planting, right? For instance, I'm at the Lock-In Festival doing an exhibit, and 6 years ago I met a guy who told me he builds BMX bikes, and you know, he's got this day job that he hates, but he really wants to start building these bikes. And so he bought a photograph for me, and I signed the back, and I wrote, "Quit your job, build bikes." 7 years later, he's, you know, has his own racing team, and he built over 100 bikes. And he told me it was because of what I told him. And I'm like, wow, what a trip. Fantastic. If you can change one person's life, if, you know, it's like I have friends who are musicians here in town, and there's such a hustle being a musician. You know, they say I'm a songwriter in Nashville. They don't really say I'm a musician because it's Toontown. But I have a friend of mine who's a musician, who's a teacher. He teaches, you know, probably has 50 students, but he's not a famous musician. And he's always talking about how this needs to happen. And I go, how many students you got? Oh, this many. I go, you're doing it, man. Like, you're changing people's life and changing the way that they think. And it's like, if you can change one person's life with your art, like, I think you're doing something right, you know?
Yeah, man. Let's take a look at some of these pictures, speaking of art.
Okay, so this is a trip, right? So I'm a Deadhead. Like, I love the Grateful Dead. And this is a portrait of Mickey Hart, who's the drummer for the Grateful Dead. And he lives back in, this is 2010, right? December the 24th, I'm in Sebastopol, and I'm about to head to Mickey's ranch. And I got a phone call from my mother, who's now passed away. This is a heavy story. A phone call from my mother, who's now passed away, says that my first cousin, who's my favorite cousin, had committed suicide the day before. And they were sitting Shiva. That's what Jews do when someone dies. And I spoke to her husband, and he's a deadhead too. And I told him I was going to Mickey's house. He says, get an autograph. And I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. I don't think I'm going to get an autograph. Who knows what's going to happen? So I pull into this like huge warehouse barn, and he's got his recording studio, and it's got all the drums from the Grateful Dead in there, like the Beast, Zakir Hussein's kit, like all thousands of drumsticks and drums from all over the world. And I set up my studio. You know, when I would travel to these places, I would get like a backdrop from the photo studio, and I'd bring my lights and I'd set it up. And I remember I walked into the back of the room, and Mickey had sunglasses on and a hat, and he was putting wood in this wood-burning fireplace. Now, Mickey has historically had a reputation of being elusive and hard to connect with, right? So I'm kind of got out my phone to show him some photos, like, you know, I got out my shine box to get him excited, and he wasn't paying attention to me. And I said, hey, man, I'm having a tragedy now. And he takes his sunglasses off. I told him what happened. He goes, I'll do whatever you want me to do. So at that moment, we were there. My job as a photographer, when I'm sharing space with people, is to break down walls, as you do when you're doing these podcasts with people. Same exact thing. So we buried him in drums like you would bury someone in the sand. His daughter's bringing out the drumsticks. In this photograph, you can see he has the beam on the left, which is an instrument that he created that the Grateful Dead does drums in space, where he uses kind of a giant slide to make noise on that. Hanging over his head is one of his drum heads that he painted. He's known for wearing these gloves when he plays. He's got the red, white, and blue wristband and the Steal Your Face on his shirt, which is the Grateful Dead logo, and some of the brass Grateful Dead things at the bottom of the photo, and a drum from Africa, which he's holding because he has a band called Planet Drum, and he plays drums around the world. So, you know, after we're done with this photo shoot, he's like, this is the greatest photo shoot I've ever done. You know, I had him. He was high from the photo shoot, right? And so most of the time, things like that suck your energy, but I give a lot of energy when I'm doing these things. And so I said, hey, Mickey, you know, I got this joint. You want to smoke it? And he goes, you know, maybe in a minute. And he starts going, he goes in, and he starts playing me drum kit in the room, and I'm moving the light around. There was another kit there. And I was like, fuck it, man. I put my camera down, I sat down at the kit, and I can keep a 4-beat on the drums, and I can hold it kind of like I can play every Ramones song, you know?
Yeah.
So I can play the drums I played when I was 12, but I never progressed past that. But I can go the 4-beat to the hi-hat.
You can lay down a backbeat.
And, you know, it lasted about 8 minutes, and then I kind of killed the vibe because I couldn't take it anywhere. You know what I mean? I was just so bummed that I couldn't take it anywhere. But it's like for those 8 minutes, it was cool. You know, letting him solo over my, you know, 4-beat rhythm.
Yeah.
And he goes, hey, man, you still got that joint? And I go, yeah. And he takes me into his bonsai tree garden, and we smoke this joint. He starts talking to me about Garcia, and when people think you're a genius, not to say that he was calling me a genius. We were just having a conversation about these things.
Yes.
And then he takes me in his office. He starts playing me sounds of exploding stars that NASA scientists had given him that later became the sounds of the universe. And I told him about my cousins again, and he signed a drum head that said to Andy, Sam, and Annie, onward, Mickey Hart, Grateful Dead. And then he goes, wait till you see what I'm giving you. And he takes me to his painting studio, and he gives me a painting of a Steal Your Face black on a bone Steal Your Face on black that he had signed. And I'm like, this is the most incredible day of my life. And he goes, you're staying for dinner. Well, you know, he came down off his buzz and he kicked me out. But, you know, I didn't stay for dinner. But the moment of connection, it's like about these walls and these barriers. You know, everyone has the ability to be cool. Whether or not they're being cool to you in that moment is all about their openness. So for me, it's trying to get people to be kids again and like bring out their childlike qualities, and that's a prime example of what we did in this photo shoot.
That's a beautiful story, and way to take it from a really the darkest beginning and have like a really bright.
I'm an
light
eternal
at the end of
optimist,
that.
man, and I believe in what I'm doing, and I have such respect for myself and the work that I don't let personal problems mess up my creative process when I have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
Or I try not to.
Well, you're a chill hang, man. That's the first rule of rock and roll.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, you know,
hey,
doesn't matter how good you are.
Can I tell you my dead story? And this
Sure.
is like this is apropos of nothing, but this is something that happened to me when I was 18. I've never really shared this, and it's a little heavy. But when I was senior in high school, it's '94. I was really into Fish at the time, but
Me too.
but the Dead, you had to respect the Dead because they started it all. And I loved Jerry because you can't not. And the Dead they would do lots of summers. They'd play in Autzen Stadium in Eugene. And this particular year, 94, they were doing just that, two shows, I think, back to back the weekend at Autzen. Eugene, Oregon is about 9-10 hours from where I live. And
this is Sandpoint, right?
No, Twin Falls, Idaho. Twin Falls, Idaho. And me and my buddy Nelson Salisbury, who's my partner in crime through all my high school years, we decided. Also, I had a VW bus at the time. I feel like that's an important part of the story.
That's a great part of the story.
69 VW bus, awesome car, still in Idaho. And we both lied to our parents and said they were going to go camping for 7 days. And we drove that VW bus to Eugene to go to the Dead show. And it was such an adventure. And also, I felt like that was like a turning point in my life where I'd like smoked weed lots in high school. I was stoned at school a lot, and amazing I got out okay. And
I can relate.
Shrooms, whatever. I was like, it was all fun. It was like a big adventure. It's like, wow, this voyage of discovery. I was super into Ram Dass. It's like, it was all
Khalil Gibran.
Yeah, man. It was all that. The whole
Jack
world was
Kerouac.
opening up to me of just, that's something that was just completely antithetical to the conservative, evangelical, Christian, everything that I had known up to that point. This is like, from probably 15 onward, I got really excited about that. And Alan Watts and Eastern philosophy and drug culture. And so senior year, we'd go out to the Dead show, like my folks, and camped out in the parking lot. And first, like, it was so cool for the first couple of nights. It was just like hippie love fest. But then I was like, people live hard out there. Like the Deadheads that are in it to win it are
the ones on the road. Yeah.
Yeah. And like 5 days in, I'm like, man, this is like pretty rough. Like people were not doing well, like I remember waking up early and like walking around, and there was just a guy like laying face down in the street like a kid. All this stuff is sort of laughable, but we ended up peeling off. Me and Nelson headed back home, and we're driving through the back roads in Oregon. There's a highway that cuts right through Bend and then John Day is the little town it goes through. And we were traveling, this is like Eastern Oregon. We're probably like 4 hours still from
by
home.
Mount Hood over there?
Way past Mount Hood. Mount Hood's out on the coast, but that's where we started, basically. And I'm driving down this long stretch, and I'm driving, and I see this girl, like, what? And I get a little closer, and I just see this girl just waving down. She's waving down the first car that she can see, and that's us. And I slow down, blur past her, slowed the car down and pull over. And she runs up, and she's like, this is a rough story. She's spattered in blood, and she says, my friends, I just killed all my friends. And I'm like, what the fuck? And so I look at Nelson, he looks at me, and this girl is like waiting for us to do something. And I'm an 18-year-old kid. I get out of the car, and we walk backwards. And when I pulled over, I didn't realize what I had just passed, but she was driving. She was just like, she and her friends were driving home from the Dead show, just like us. And she hit the biggest sycamore tree that you could ever hit, driving 60 miles an hour down the straight road. And so we walk, and I just see this car just like that looks like a sardine can, glass everywhere. And I can see there's like somebody in the car, some like in the back seat. And I look, and there's this kid like laying face down, like in front of the car. I won't describe it any more than that because it's just too rough. But I watched somebody take their last breaths of life. And it was really like, and I grew up, I'm the son of a mortician, and I've seen so many dead people, like hundreds, that's one thing, but I had never seen, and I still haven't. I saw a kid die, and it was obviously like, as terrible as it sounds, Nelson was there too. And in the meantime, actual grown-ups had pulled up, and some kid, some farmer was like, you kids, go down to that house and call the cops. This is before cell phones. So Nelson and I got in the car, and we drove down to the nearest farmhouse and told the farmers to call, what had just happened. And then we did that, and we came down the long driveway, and if we turned right, we'd go back to the scene of the accident, and we turned left, and we'd go home. And I looked at Nelson, and I just wheeled the car left, and we just like drove home in silence. And it was like at that time in my life, all I wanted to do was be home, and I just wanted to tell my parents. I just wanted to like be with my family and tell them I loved them, and I like couldn't, because I had like lied to them and been gone for 7 days. And I got home, and Dad was like, "How was camping?" And I had to be like, "It was great." They're probably hearing this right now. They're just like, "Oh my God, you idiot."
It's like a truth session.
It's a truth session. But anyway, it's just like the upside of that, if there is one, is that the Dead offered, and I remember Jerry talking about this, like a true adventure. And adventures aren't always, they don't always have happy endings. They're kind of a little dangerous. And I feel like there's something about that time in life it's getting harder to come by with everybody living in their phones. And I feel like things are so much more slotted in, there's just like less wildness and opportunity for unstructured living. And,
that's when the magic happens, is when you're like following your instincts and you're in the flow and you're just going with it.
Yeah.
And like for you to see something like that, man, thank you for sharing that. That's, makes you stronger and probably gave you more empathy and, and made you be more thankful.
Made me grateful.
For the life that you have.
Yes.
And, and
it made me also
family
just be like, just wake up and like pay attention to what you're doing with your life
That's
a little
it.
bit, It was like, you're not a little kid, and this life is fragile, and these kids were just like you. You could have this could have been you. Could have been me.
Could have been you. I
was
mean,
the
a
next car
Volkswagen
down
bus.
the
If you hit
line.
a sycamore tree in a Volkswagen bus,
I'd been that kid lying in front of it.
that's
yeah.
right. Thank God.
Let's
you're
look at
not.
another photo,
That's
shall we?
right. We're gonna cut that. Okay, so can you guess who that is?
Is that Derek Trucks?
That is Derek Trucks. And so Derek Trucks is known for playing this, red SG. And if you look at it, it's got Buddy Guy's signature, it's got B.B. King's signature, and he's one of the greatest slide guitar players in the world. And that's why I put the slides on his fingers, and he's wearing his, I think, his feather, that he has around his neck. I think a lot of, the people in his band, I think that's what he gives to them. That's kind of like his calling card, like you're in his tribe.
Yeah.
So, these photographs have clues in the photographs. And, you can look at this photograph and you can feel him, It's like, I believe that when you look at this photo, his hands are up like stop. The slides are on his fingers. And I believe that's what his playing does to you when you hear him play. And they say that, portraits are all about the eyes. But when you look at this photograph and some of these other photographs in my work, you can still feel the people. So maybe it's not about the eyes. Maybe it's just about how comfortable you make someone and them with their stuff,
I mean, it's definitely a presence.
It's a presence.
Eyes or no.
Eyes or no. Okay, so this one is interesting. You're looking at this book right here. So this is a guy named Uncle Lionel Batiste. Was the bass drum player for the Treme brass band. He's the guy who would lead the second line marches. He was a real eccentric character. He always wore a watch on his hand. He always said he had time on his hands. You know what I mean? And so when I shot this portrait, it's in a double-page spread in the front of the first book of Preservation Hall, which is one of the oldest venues in North America. And Uncle Lionel is an older man. He couldn't hold this drum over his head. And I remember Benny Jones, the leader of the band, I said, well, what are we going to do? He's like, hang it with a coat hanger. So we hung this drum with a coat hanger from an electrical conduit. And Lionel actually stood on one of these old wooden benches and lifted his chin up below the bottom of the drum so you could see his neckline. And that was the first time I ever learned that I could hang an instrument. So we're talking about what we were saying earlier, it's the process. You have to do it to learn what the process is that works. Now you come into my studio, I've got hooks on tracks that you can move and I can hang anything, I've mastered how to do that. But it's funny, I let these musicians give me their priceless instruments and I'm hanging them in the air. It's kind of a weird thing that they let me do. Okay, so this is the first portrait I think that I shot that kind of took me up to the next level of musicians and known musicians. And so the funny thing about this photograph and the Derek Trucks photograph, 3 days before I was at the gathering at the Vibes Music Festival in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And we were there the first night and we were going to a party, and I asked my friend, hey, should I stick the stuff in the trunk? You know, wrong thing to be saying. So he came out and all my camera gear was stolen. The window was smashed, probably about 10 grand worth of gear. So I went to Cincinnati, and the photographer, it was called Alias Studios, actually let me use his Canon equipment. Now, 99% of the photographs I've ever shot were shot on Nikon, but this one and the Derek Trucks one were shot on Canon cameras, which is kind of funny. But so Bootsy Collins is known for playing the star bass. He's known for wearing the star glasses, for wearing these illustrious outfits with the top hats. And so I dressed him up in his regalia. So I wanted another prop. And so Bootsy had a band called Bootsy's Rubber Band. Yeah. So on the way to the shoot, I stopped at Staples and I bought like thousands of rubber bands. And when I showed up with the rubber bands, like Bootsy was really digging it. And I asked him, I go, has anyone ever shot you with rubber bands before? And he said, no, but I thought it made so much sense because he had a band called Bootsy's Rubber Band. Yeah. And so for me, again, trying to tell the story in whatever way possible. You know, I use clues from people's names, you know, whatever it is I can, that's what I do, you know, whatever is the most obvious to me, because I don't know how much of an intellect I am. I just kind of try to tell the story as good as I can.
That's great, man. That's the cover of the book too.
That's right? The cover of the book. Yeah. Both books have Bootsy on the cover. Yeah. This is a really cool thing. In 2015, I'd been chosen to be the featured artist at the North Sea Jazzfest in Rotterdam, Holland, and the State Department helped to fund it, with the U.S. consulate, and they flew me over there, and I got to exhibit my work at the North Sea Jazzfest, and you know, I set up a portrait studio there in the gallery, you know, and they also had a jazz museum that they had built, which was actually based off of that New Orleans exhibit that we talked about at the beginning of the pod. They kind of copied me, but he admitted that that was the inspiration for what he had done. But so this is a portrait of Rhiannon Giddens, who is in the Americana scene. I'm sure you know Rhiannon.
No,
she's probably your friend.
Fantastic.
Jamie Dick is her drummer who lives around here. You probably played with before.
He played on a record of mine.
He's played on your record, yeah. So I remember I went up to Jamie Dick. I met him backstage, and I said, hey, man, you know, I just moved to Nashville. I go, hey, I do these real crazy photos. I'm doing this photo studio up here. Will you ask Rhiannon if she wants to do it? And so Rhiannon actually came and, you know, sat for a portrait. And that's a clawhammer banjo. Is that correct for me to say?
Yeah.
So, you know.
She's a great player.
She's great. I mean, she's on Beyonce's new record, you know. I mean, she has blown up, you know. I'm not going to say it's because of the photo shoot, but you never know.
You never know.
You never know.
You know,
no, I doubt that.
It all comes
together. But it's cool that, you know, the musicians see my photographs, and, you know, the ones that dig it, and they want to be a part of it. Some people want to be a part of it because other people are a part of it. Other people don't want to do it because everyone they know did it, and they want to be artists and do something different. Yeah. You know, it's just like whatever. It's just good. Art. So it was just so rad to like be in Holland, you know, and shoot portraits of like, you know, people, and for people to like want to do what I ask them to do. It's like it's just a crazy life, man.
It's funny how the farther you go away from home, the more you're respected.
I know. Because the people outside are like, wow, this is amazing. At home, they're like, oh, there's that dude again.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's like the Blue Dog guy in New Orleans, right? You're talking about earlier about how you pigeonhole yourself in something. Mm-hmm. Well, at least you got something. You know what I mean? I'd like the Blue Dog guy in New Orleans, you know, who paints the Blue Dog with the Absolute vodka bottles. And, you know, I'm happy to be the guitar head guy. But, you know, I'm stoked to put out my other work, though, so people can see, you know, I have 5,000 bands I've shot. So I'm excited to get into that.
I mean, this is a gateway to you, you know, and that's so many people never find a thing. You know,
well, because, you know, they don't try. People are afraid to try. Don't be afraid to fail. And you have to fail to succeed. And the only way you succeed is by learning how to make it work, whatever it is.
I saw something really recently about that. Some philosopher guy talking about how in order to be creative, you just have to embrace the possibility of failure. And that's something that kids do. We've talked about this on the podcast. Critter Eldridge, amazing flat picker, was here talking about his daughter like trying to learn how to speak, and that she just like can't get the words, and then she would fail over and over and over and over again on her way to success, and how like that is such a fundamental prerequisite for any kind of creative success at all, and that it's the tragedy of growing up for so many is that you learn not to fail. You learn to be afraid of failure. You're punished for failure and rewarded for being right. And I don't know, I feel like anytime I turn on the news or any sort of debate on, culture war stuff, it's just like two people who are so afraid to fail that they're just both presenting this immobile, 100% accurate in their minds view of the world. Whereas if we're all just a little bit more gentle, and just consider the possibility of that failure is not only possible, but likely and maybe even inevitable, then we all go forward, whether it's in creativity or making a better world for each other. That started to turn into a little bit of a preaching sermon.
Critter, man, if you're listening to this, I'd love to shoot one of these portraits of you. I've talked to Critter. And, I know Kristen Andreasen, who he married, right? But I know her from New York when, she used to come over. My neighbor was Eric Deutsch, who's now the keyboard player in the Black Crowes. And he had a band with Jefferson Hamer, who you probably know.
Oh, he's so good. Yeah.
And so Hamer and Kristen Andreasen had like a duo, after Kristen was in Uncle Earl, right? Yep. So she's a great talent. Critter's a great talent. There's so many great musicians here in Nashville. We're so lucky we get to share space with these people, right?
It's the most exciting place in the world.
So much fun.
So much fun.
If you like Americana music and banjos and pedal steels. Okay, so here's the portrait of Rhiannon, that's been used all over the place. So it's these normal portraits that if I go back to those editors that I met in 2003 who told me to do some studying to find my voice, I believe that I found it now. So you can look at my portraits, and if you know my work, you're probably going to know that I'm the guy who shot it, because everything looks the same.
Mm-hmm.
I shoot everything similarly, and that's just, about finding your voice as an artist,
Yeah, man, that's your tone. And so what we're looking at is the revealed photograph of Rhiannon.
So that's Rhiannon, and the next one is Alam Khan.
There's something in the eyes there.
And there's Bootsy with all the rubber bands.
How'd you get those rubber bands to fly?
His wife, Peppermint Patty, she's actually kneeling down below him with a bunch of rubber bands. And I had her throwing them up in the air. And then the photographer and his daughter were both on ladders on both sides of him, throwing them at him. So, a lot of people would just say, oh, I'm just going to do that in Photoshop. Again, I don't know how to do it in Photoshop. So it took me about 3-4 tries, but we eventually got it right.
Looks fantastic.
And there's Derek. So, it's funny. I never shot a portrait on the gray backdrop in the studio. That's in the stairwell of my building that I lived in Brooklyn for a decade, up at the top. And so that's the portrait of Derek that's in the book. And now I realize, eventually I'm going to put out a book called 475 Kent, and put photographs of all the musicians around the building in the freight elevator, Charlie Hunter riding a tricycle down the hallway, or King Sunny Ade and 25 Nigerians on the roof. I have all these portraits of all this stuff. And now that my server didn't go down like we were talking about, I'll have the opportunity to do the book, man. I didn't lose everything. So I'm going to back it all up.
That's great.
That's Derek. And there's...
Oh, I recognize
there he is.
that.
So here's Corby,
Julio.
and, it's the funny thing. So here's the instrument head of Corby. And so when I met Corby was working with John Scarpati. And I remember you had just won an award for your album cover.
That John
did.
For, yeah.
And, you were playing the ukulele, and you had this whole look with your bow tie. And I just thought it was so cool. And it was the first time, I had ever shot someone with a ukulele. And, you notice, by putting your hands up, it was covering up the rest of your head because, the ukulele is small. And so these photo shoots are all about improvising. And, if you go to the normal portrait of you, I think it's like a really good representation of where you were at that moment in your career, right?
I'm glad that you caught me. And I was much more Instrumenthead worthy, I think, back in that time when I was I definitely was rocking a uniform. I had the velvet jacket. I had the bow tie. Man, I'd go to the coffee shop in that thing. I was like,
I mean, it was a great
devoted
look.
to
That's
the
a great,
look.
It's a great look. It's like, you got like a, smoker's jacket on.
Mixed reviews. I have some colleagues, some buddies of mine. They're like, I hated that bow tie bullshit.
I like the bow tie, man.
But
It's a good
you know what?
look.
The cool thing, yeah, I like it too. I have 50 of those
You
bow
should
ties
bring
now.
that back.
And I also like know how to tie them. And there's something a little bit gentlemanly about knowing how to tie a bow tie, I think.
Okay, so here's the portrait of Mickey that I said we buried him in the drums. So, Mickey used this as his promo shot for years, and it actually hangs in the Smithsonian,
Fantastic.
this photograph. And so for a dude who never took a photo class, and I just learned from mentors. I mean, I hung out with one of my mentors from Colorado, a few days ago, who taught me about, as an artist, all you have is your copyright. Never sign your copyright away. And to this day, I've never done that. This photograph is like a known photograph of Mickey in his life and later in his life. So I'm proud, to be a Deadhead, like we were talking about, and like be a small part of this Deadhead journey. If the 12-year-old kid at summer camp listening to, Sugar Magnolia knew where that music would take me, who would have thought, I mean, the whole deal is cool. I mean, I'm so proud to be here. And so now I have these books, and if you guys dig them, go check them out online,
Yeah, man. Instrumenthead is the series. The books are easily findable. You are ever active in the community and beyond, whether it's Jazzfest or I'm still going to call it Bluegrass Underground.
The Cavern Sessions
slow
Live.
to learn
Yeah.
the new thing. But man, I just so appreciate your friendship and you taking the time to talk with us and share a little of your art and your heart.
Well, thank you for your time. And, I've been watching what you've been doing, and, we may not hang, but we definitely have a camaraderie, every time we see each other. I mean, I walked in here and had flashbacks of having to drag that heavy ass piano into our studio. And,
Yeah,
I think
man.
it's time to release that video, man.
We got it.
We got it. I mean, it's great.
Cut it up.
I
Yeah.
mean, we got to
and that's
cut
a
that
moment
up
too.
I mean, it seems like you got your boy over here who would love to cut that thing
Yeah,
up.
man. We're going to talk off camera. I can't wait to see what you do next. I love you very much. And thanks for your time.
Well, thank you for your time, and I'm proud to be on the Morse Code podcast. Yeah, baby.
Hey, thanks for watching. Go ahead and click here to like and subscribe. You can click right there to watch another video, or click here to watch a playlist featuring songs of the Morse Code podcast. Okay, thank you very much.